what would you define as FMA, and what would you define as a Filipino? This is a hard question, but it is an interesting one.
Hard question. And good question too. FMA is basically any martial combat system that was derived in the Philippines. All right. Or I won't say I stand corrected. I definitely stand corrected in this one. That was created, influenced by Filipinos. The reason why I say that is I have a good friend of mine named Guru Nick Merchant. He's a guru and student. Maybe you know him.
He's a Sarada practitioner. Yeah, and he's a dog brother.
Sarada practitioners are amazing Kali Eskrima fighters and practitioners. And it was created where? In the United States.
Yep.
It's American. Yep. But it was derived by a Filipino who came from the Philippines. So what is FMA? I would say it's a Filipino martial art, but it's derived from not just from the Philippine country or nation, but from Filipino practitioners also, based off of Filipino martial tradition. I know that sounds kind of long-winded. No. I think it's something that's derived from Filipino martial tradition or culture. So Kabbalah Sarada Eskrima, for example, is an FMA system technically, and it is an American martial art because it was developed in Stockton, California, in the United States. That's something that the Kabbalah Sarada guys should be very proud of. It's an American, that's a great thing. For example, Jeet Kune Do, it's a kung fu art, but it's developed by an American of Chinese ancestry, but it was developed in America, so it's an American martial art, for example. So anything that's derived, FMA is any combat system derived based off of a Filipino martial tradition. It doesn't have to be from has to be made in the Philippines per se. It can be anywhere, but it was derived from that because that's where it is. Filipino. That's a very long-winded thing. Are we talking about Filipinos who were born in the Philippines or who have deep roots there? Because
just the identity alone. Yeah. I
know. Me, I'm born in the Philippines. I am an immigrant, but I identify as a Filipino American because I was raised in America. I don't denounce the Filipino culture or the Philippines itself. I love the Philippines. Those are my roots, my family's roots, everybody. But to be Filipino, I guess to define it, you have to be living in the Philippines, embracing the culture. And I'm going to say this also, you're not necessarily brown skin like us. You could be white. And there's a lot of folks who are living there who are not born of the ethnicity as Filipinos, but they are Filipinos because they talk, they speak, they embrace the culture, they're living the culture. They're Filipino. Just like how being an American. We're Americans, we live in America. If you really push comes to shove, what am I? I'm an American. I'm not Filipino. I'm an American. I'm Fil-Am. I'm Filipino American. So if you want to define it that way, I might get some criticism off of that answer, but if you really want to find it, if a person is living in the Philippines there for a certain amount of time, who've embraced the culture, thinking about it, including the language and speaking it, doing everything that everybody does, you're a Filipino. Definitely. Just like how folks who are in America, they're Americans.
It's the tricky subject of which that was a great answer because I try to ask those two lines of questions with everybody because it is part of the overall issue of our culture and by way and extension our Filipino martial arts community and culture. So thank you for that. What I find this is in a discussion of national identity and citizenry, cultural lived-in heritage, cultural heritage as to what it was but not lived in. Then you have your ethnicity, and then you have your lived-in experience. And you can have all of those, and you can have a few of those. And where people get hung up on the issue of being not Filipino enough, it's just that's a limiting mindset. So,
and not Filipino enough. Listen, let's just be real. We're if you're talking about the Philippine Islands, we got a lot of cross-culturing going on for generations, from the Spaniards to whoever, all the other merchant sailors coming into the islands too. Even Dan and Hassan, Guru Dan and Hassan had said that a lot of our DNA is also coming from South and Central America because when the Spaniards took a lot of the Filipinos as their own sailors and fighters, conquered parts of South America, brought those over to the Philippines. They intermarried. I mean, we have some of that mixture also. I mean, I've got a grandmother. My late grandmother. She's full Chinese, but she grew up in the Philippines. She identifies herself as Filipino. I have family members like that. So, and it's not as they're not as easy, I guess, targeted because they're Asian. They're Asian looking, so they could definitely pass. But push comes to shove, they weren't originally from the Philippines, but they grew up and embraced the culture and did everything. So yeah, that's to be like, oh, you're not Filipino enough. Yeah, there's traditions out of it too, but honestly, like, come on, we've over the years of colonizations and intermixing and everything else, I got Spanish, obviously Spanish, Chinese, German, Portuguese ancestry, just to name a few. So we all have that. So you're Filipino enough, we're talking about just trying to live and embrace and try to preserve some of our culture, but it should be something that should be a negative connotation or a sense of criticism to other people. When second, third generations like us or first generations like us were being criticized for that, it's a turnoff. But then again, I mean, this is a long story. This could be a whole long conversation in sociology classes also. Oh yeah. We're talking about Americans too who deal with that too. Italian Americans too. I mean, every culture who settled in the United States or any other country, they deal with that from their motherland, from folks there. So that's another discussion as it is. But yeah,
it's a complicated question that I ask everybody because everybody's got a different answer to it. But the fact that people talk about it, that's how we get closer to a consensus of dealing with the identity and the bigger social issues, because we could just not talk about it and continue with prejudice and ignorance. So why not? And this is having the challenging questions like that helps us grow, because FMA is way more than just sticks, swords, knives, and whatnot, because it is, again, it's culture. It's a new culture, because as it's developed around the globe and integrating and involving other things, it creates new culture, and that's beautiful. And it's a culture of growth and not stagnation, and because stagnation is death. And that's where FMA can go by way of obscurity, because if it's not growing and it's not evolving, of course it has to have that ties back to its originator and in respect to that. But the fact is, if we're not moving forward, then we're not doing anything. And even going backwards, like, how far back do we want to go with colonization? Because are we dealing with Philippines as a century ago when we became a unified nation states? Do we want to go back to the Americans? Do we want to go back to the Spaniards? Do we want to go back to the Muslims? It's like, how far back do you want to go? Because realistically, until we were unified underneath the Spaniards and then the Americans, we were sub-kingdoms and individual tribes. So we weren't a consensus as a singular nation, thereby single culture. And this is where the debate leads forward that I find actually within the Filipino martial arts community is it's tribal based upon region, and trying to get the overall consensus of FMA, it's all of it, and it can be all of it, and all of it can be awesome.
Yeah.